first off, we talk about how top of funnel content is dead in AI search. The second thing is that with AI, people search specifically and not broadly. And then how you communicate your value props will dictate how you're recommended. Think of ChatGPT as your salesperson, or like the first touch point.
Because of what we were saying earlier, that people give all this context and background, like I have this problem and blah, 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 before or in the running conversation where they ask for something or ChatGPT naturally recommends solutions, products, brands, services, it needs to know that you solve those pain points. Okay, welcome to the Grow and Convert Marketing Show. Today we're going to talk, once again it feels like, about AI search. Specifically, everyone is talking about how to get mentioned by LLMs. And we have obviously published an episode with Caitlin, who did the study on our end about Google SEO correlating with how often ChatGPT mentions you. You can go back and look at that or the associated article. We can link to it. But TLDR there is we noticed that the higher our clients rank on Google, the more LLMs are mentioning them, like ChatGPT. And it was like a 60 to 80% correlation between ChatGPT and Perplexity, depending on how high you're ranking. So we're like, okay, SEO seems to matter. But the larger question is just, what do we do there? Because that's fine. So SEO kind of seems to matter, but that was a very specific study where we just typed in the exact keyword that we were ranking on Google and ChatGPT. But people are asking, but hold on. In ChatGPT, people don't type in just one keyword. If you're ranking in Google for best accounting software, very few people show up to ChatGPT and just type in best accounting software and then hit enter. What do? They have a conversation. And Benji wrote this article that is recently published on our blog. And Benji, maybe you can walk through for people kind of the insight you had in thinking about this side of the question of, well, wait a minute, the way people quote unquote search, and it's not even search, you're like having a conversation or we call it prompting, right? The way people search or prompt is different. And then you and I talked it through and we realized, wait, that has some significant consequences in how ChatGPT and the others are going to mention or recommend a brand or product. When are they never going to mention or recommend a brand or product? And kind of the consequences that are, a decently big thing for marketers producing content. So maybe you can talk about it from your perspective of like, what were you thinking? And we can walk through that argument for folks.
Yeah. So first of all, I just wanted to share the article so people know what we're talking about. So this is the one that I wrote recently. I'll kind of just scroll through it really quickly. First off, we talk about how top of funnel content is dead in AI search. We'll go into detail on that in a second and talk about that. The second thing is that with AI, people search specifically and not broadly. And then how you communicate your value props will dictate how you're recommended. So those are kind of the three main things I want to cover. Do you want me to start off with the top of funnel argument, or do you think we should start off somewhere else?
Yeah, or I'm just kind of curious where, I remember you kind of brought it up to me in like a phone conversation that we were having, but I'm curious if do you remember where this came up or how you thought about this?
Yeah, I mean, I was flying back from New York and I was on the plane. I don't know. I just been thinking a lot about AI and what the differences are between that and Google. And I think the first thing that I realized was that specific versus broad argument. And I was just thinking how people search in Google is really around keywords. But as I started to use ChatGPT and some of these platforms a lot more, I realized that I was giving a lot more detail about myself and what I was trying to accomplish. And yeah, that's kind of where the initial thesis for this blog post came from, is just when I was searching in ChatGPT, the question actually might start with a keyword. It could start with best content marketing agencies or best tool for this. And then when you get your response, what was different is you would follow it up with like a more refined question or just giving it more detail and then asking a follow-up question. So yeah, that's essentially where it came from. Was just kind of realizing how I was searching in these platforms was changing. And then also when I was looking at the responses that AI would give, how I was intrigued by how different companies were messaged and positioned different ways by the AI. So for example, when I was looking at best content marketing agencies and best SaaS content marketing agencies and best SaaS marketing agencies and just running these searches to try to see if Grow and Convert was showing up, I was not only trying to see if we ranked, but I was trying to see how AI interpreted what we did and what the value props of our company was. And what was interesting was I felt like the way that we were messaged and positioned was more in line with how we would want to communicate things over a sales call than some of our competition. Like I looked at some of the results for our competition. I'm like, man, that would really suck if that's what AI thought of us, or if that's how AI communicated our value props to our clients.
Can you give an example? So let me replay what you're saying to make sure that I and the listeners
Sure.
understand. So you said first you started off saying you were noticing in your own behavior that you gave it a lot more detail, that you might start a conversation with ChatGPT looking for a particular product. I've done that too. Like some household kitchen item or like some home improvement tool or something like what's the best? Oh, a drill. I had an issue drilling screws in. And then but then you said, but even if you didn't give it context before, you'd have a conversation. It would come back and give you some recommendations, and then you'd give more context. Why is that noteworthy? Or how is that different from Google, from searching for something on Google?
Okay. In Google, someone would search for a keyword, and then like let's say even the best content marketing agencies example. So the intent is to try to find a list of the best content marketing agencies. But maybe you're a startup, maybe you're an enterprise company, maybe you have a team already. And so in the Google world, you would have to go through each of the different links and click into them, read through the blog post to try to find specific details that stood out to you. So
Because in Google, you're not likely giving Google all that context.
exactly.
Right? That's the key thing, is that most of us in Google search short phrases. At most, you could say enterprise content marketing agency, B2B content marketing agency for startups, for SaaS, I don't know, some context like that. But it's not more than that. Versus in
Versus,
ChatGPT, what are,
yeah, versus in ChatGPT, people were like, what happened is as we started getting leads from ChatGPT, we would ask the prospects for the prompt or what they were actually searching for. And you realized how much more detail they gave about themselves. So they would say stuff like this: I'm a founder. I've either tried this before or I've never done this channel before. I'm really interested in lead acquisition from content. What are the agencies that you would recommend that are specialized just in that? So in lead acquisition, as opposed to what? As opposed to like thought leadership content, as opposed to like content production. And then
yeah. So they were giving it all that context.
AI would give you then a recommendation back and say, these are the agencies that are specialized uh, in lead generation. And they also have these case studies that you should look into. That
It would say that?
realization.
It would recommend case studies?
Yeah, like if you look at us and the way that it describes us, it says we have a ton of case studies on our site around lead generation.
Interesting. I hadn't noticed that. And then so is that what you mean? You're glad that we weren't positioned the way some of the other content agencies it was recommending were positioned, that you were happy that it positioned Grow and Convert as like the content agency to go to for lead generation?
Yeah, it would say things like if you're focused on generating trial signups or demos from content, Grow and Convert might be the best agency for you. That kind of goes to that last point in the post about how you communicate your value props on your site and in your content is going to dictate how AI recommends you. So
Well,
for
hold on.
example,
We're gonna
okay.
get there. We're gonna get there. But I want to keep digging into sort of this at the beginning. So it positioned us that way around lead generation, and then you made this comment of, "I'm glad we weren't. It wasn't positioning us the way it was positioning some of our competitors." What were some examples there? Like, what are some other ways that it was listing content agencies?
Yeah, so some of our competitor agencies where I actually think they're very similar to what we do or provide a similar type service offering and would probably claim similar value props on sales calls. But the way that AI recommended them, it was like, this is the best content marketing agency if you wanted to produce top of funnel content or something like that.
And
Where
you're glad that it wasn't saying hire, grow, and convert if you want top of funnel content.
Yeah, or it would just say like that's good at writing thought leadership content or stuff like that. And I'm like, if you're a brand that's truly trying to find value from content marketing and you saw that that was how ChatGPT recommended these companies, I think you would be much less likely to reach out to those companies because it's not really aligned with what you're looking for and it's not really aligned with what your goals are. Yeah, maybe some people want thought leadership content, maybe some people care about top of funnel stuff, but I just felt like the way that AI was positioning us was really in line with how we communicate with our own prospects and message externally. And so I just thought it was really interesting how the AI knew exactly how to communicate our value.
So we're going to get into how it knows that and kind of the consequences for marketers and content. But I want to tell one kind of anecdotal story to make this come to life. Benji quickly said something like, we were asking our leads this. So I'll tell you two stories anonymizing who they are for privacy. So specifically, so first of all, you should be asking this kind of question. We only got this insight because we do a couple things. In our work with us form, we have a field at the bottom, how did you hear about us? And so we've noticed that, I don't know, anecdotally, it feels like 80%, I'm sure the number is smaller if I actually counted, of the last few months leads say ChatGPT. Maybe it's 60%. I don't know. Don't hold me to that number. But it's like, in the last few months, it's been like one after another. It just says how you heard about us, ChatGPT, ChatGPT. And then when we get on the call, for the ones that are a fit after an email exchange and we get on a call with them, we will talk about it. And so for ChatGPT, we'll straight up say, hey, for our own education, like, do you know what you searched for? And some of them, two of them, like one of them just straight up read through or I think screen shared the conversation with us. And it was a co-founder of some other agency. I forget exactly what they did, like a design or something, marketing also, maybe general purpose marketing agency. And he went through this whole thing where he didn't even start saying, I'm looking for a content agency. He started a ChatGPT thread saying, help me work through the steps I need to do to get myself out of the business. Because he wanted to like do other things and he had some other co-founders. And so it was walking through this whole thing with him, ChatGPT was, about how, okay, what are your responsibilities? What are you doing? Okay, we need to find ways to delegate that now and have them running. And in the course of that conversation, it came up that one of the things he was doing was marketing, content, SEO. And so it was like recommending vendors and then it recommended us. The second one was a lady that had a particular like financial based firm and she had been doing outbound and wanted to transition to inbound marketing and gave it that kind of context. She straight up, at least the chat that she sent us, it straight up asked like, I'm looking for these SEO agencies or whatever. But I noticed in her prompt that she said like, that can generate tons of leads for us. But then I noticed in the answer, it gave an answer saying exactly what type of business she had. So the prompt she gave us didn't say, I have this business, but the answer knew it. So meaning she must have given us a part of the conversation, but somewhere either earlier in the conversation or in the project or however her ChatGPT is set up, it already knew exactly what her business was. And then that must mean it must have known all kinds of other things she's chatted with it about in terms of the business. And I think I read that OpenAI says that ChatGPT now will have some level, not full, but some level of cross memory between your conversations. And I've noticed that in my own usage. Yeah, I asked it for some like meal planning tips, and it mentioned some very specific Nepalese dishes, and I was like, how in the world? Like, this is a brand new chat. I was like, how does it even know this? And I was like, how do you know that? And it was like, oh, you've chatted about it. And I was like, not in this conversation that we were talking about how ChatGPT works. So those are two anecdotes to really illustrate for you what we were talking about, or what Benji was saying, is that level of context is just eons deeper than the like max 5 word phrase you enter into Google.
Yeah, and really quickly, I kind of wanted to bring this up just to elaborate the point that I was saying. So if I were to type in what are the best SaaS content marketing agencies, it does give me this list, and this is what I was talking about just in terms of how you're communicated really matters. So if you're searching for marketing agencies known for driving growth, leads, and conversions, look, I just typed this, but it knows this is important to me. So again, there's a level of personalization that ChatGPT brings to the search because it knows that these are things that I care about because of previous searches, like what you said.
Yeah, so
Like
let
when
me
I'm
read this out for people who are listening on the podcast. So Benji's showing his ChatGPT screen, and all he typed in this particular prompt is what are the best SaaS agencies? And it gives a list, but at the beginning, before the list, it says here are some of the best SaaS content marketing agencies for driving growth, leads, and conversions, specifically for software companies. So just like growth, lead, and conversions, he didn't type that into his question, but it's saying that. So it has some of that history. And then the first one it lists is grow and convert. And then strengths, it puts pain point SEO, content that drives signups, conversion focused. So now we can transition into that part, which is okay, if we accept this premise, which I think everyone buy into, that there's just an insane amount of context and richness and detail and pain points that users type into ChatGPT or that ChatGPT knows about users, how do you then get it to recommend your product, brand, service, company, whatever, in those natural conversations that users have with it? And we can start here with this screen you're showing of grow and convert, and it says pain point SEO, content that drives signups, conversion focused. The obvious thing to say there is, where did it get that from? It got that from our website because we've been writing about this for like 8 years or whatever, of pain point SEO, that we drive signups and conversions. And so
Yeah.
then when someone asks for a content agency and says, in however they say it, and you can't predict for ChatGPT exactly how they're going to say it because it's not like this 2 word Google keyword that like Ahref shows the search volume for. It's going to be like a natural conversation, and it could come up in a variety of different natural language ways. It's not keyword based, right? It like understands semantically what the language is saying. So you can't predict it, but somehow, some way, if ChatGPT thinks, okay, this person wants a content agency and really needs like signups and conversions from that content, it then has to go to its knowledge, which is either some mix of training data versus Googling, or in its case, Binging, and be like, oh, okay, grow and convert seems to specialize in that. So the obvious thing is, like level one, if we want to show up for those types of searches or conversations with ChatGPT, we need to have published content on the internet somewhere in some shape or form that associates the brand grow and convert with content that is sign up and conversion focused.
Yeah. I think, said in another way, I think maybe in the past you could get away with not having very clarified positioning and messaging. And now I think you really need to think through how you want to communicate your business before you start publishing stuff on your website and in various pieces of content.
Why could you get away with that before?
Because you could bring people into your website and have different pages that said different things for different audiences. And you could maybe have disparate messaging. And having worked in many B2B companies before, it's very common where the sales team might communicate things one way, the marketing team might communicate things another way, the product team might communicate things another way, because they have a view of their customer base slightly differently. And so while they would generally say the same kinds of things, they might say it in different ways. And now that ChatGPT, if someone searches in here, think of ChatGPT as your salesperson or like the first touch point. And so you can kind of see here if I was a potential client just looking through these, there's definitely some things in here that would probably turn me off, or maybe make it so that I wouldn't reach out to these companies. So if you were someone looking for growth or leads or conversions, and you were to scroll through this list, and we were just looking at the strengths here, like, okay, so if you weren't an early stage company, you'd probably dismiss this one.
Yeah, that one
Um,
says full service SaaS marketing for early stage companies. Another one down there says HubSpot plus process optimization for SaaS agencies. And
exactly.
but,
So
but, but
if
like
you didn't
if
care,
that particular agency specifically wants those clients, that's great for them.
yeah,
But if that's
exactly.
only
Yeah, if it's one subset of customers that they serve, then anyone who's not using HubSpot or doesn't really care about HubSpot's immediately going to dismiss this agency. Then same thing here. Like, okay, content plus link building, but it doesn't really say anything about driving growth or conversions. Same thing here. Okay, they have a strong link building engine for B2B SaaS. Like, most people won't care about that. And all that to say that now I just think it's so important to have crystal clear messaging, not only on your homepage but through all the same content. So you'd said, like, why is it bringing this stuff in? Because we repeat the same messaging in our homepage and in all of the content and all of our outward facing messaging that we produce. And so that's why it's bringing these things in. And so I think going forward, what's going to be very important for companies is to have that crystal clear messaging and make sure it's communicated every single place on your site. Because if it's not, and if it's kind of confusing, or you have like multiple different talking points, you're going to have stuff be brought into the way that AI communicates the value of your business that you may not want. And it could potentially turn good customers away from you.
so I'm going to level up and then I'm going to push back on that and we can have a discussion. So the other kind of takeaway from this is because of what we were saying earlier, that people give all this context and background, like I have this problem and blah, 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 before or in the running conversation where they ask for something or ChatGPT naturally recommends solutions, products, brands, services, it needs to know that you solve those pain points. So the other big takeaway here is specificity. Like Benji's saying, have your positioning clear. But what does that mean? It means like you need to have published content. And we're not probably going to get into this so much. Like we're talking about content published on our own site. It could also include content published on other places or like social campaigns, Reddit, blah, 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 wherever it ingests information from. But you need to have the published content talk about your solution in the context of really specific pain points. Otherwise, in this ChatGPT world where someone's not just typing in content marketing agency, enter, and you're just using link building to be the first spot on Google, and it doesn't matter whether you just positioned yourself as a general purpose content agency or someone for early stage SaaS or someone for lead generation like us or HubSpot like that other agency. That doesn't matter in that Google world. Now all of a sudden it is going to matter because no one does that. Now it's a really specific conversation that's super specific for Benji, and it's maybe slightly different for me because we're different people or whatever. And so, like, you need to know and have published content that talks about how you solve really specific problems. Otherwise, when somebody's having that conversation with ChatGPT about their specific problems, you're not going to have it, it's not going to mention you if you haven't done that.
Yeah,
So
correct.
then my pushback would be maybe something like what you said you've seen at other B2B companies could work in the sense that like you could have one landing page for how your blah 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 SaaS company solves this IT problem, but then it also has this solution for the marketing team and the product team and the blah 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 team. Like how all these SaaS companies have that. And then maybe that's a way of being like, okay, if somebody has a conversation from product about this problem, with ChatGPT, we can get brought up. And then if someone from IT brings it up in a different way, we can still get brought up, right? That would be a
For
viable
sure.
strategy.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually do think that's how SEO is going to change going forward, is that you're going to need to produce a lot more specific content. So in the past, you could have gotten away with just creating one post on best content marketing agencies and just kind of covered that at a high level. But maybe now it makes sense to create a best content marketing agencies for startups, or like the different segments, or to talk about how you do it for different verticals. So yeah, most of our clients are SaaS, but we also have healthcare clients that we've done, and like other industries. And so creating content around those, and then not only creating content, but really going into depth about who the customers were, the situation that they were in, how you specifically helped them. If you're not publishing those details online, you're less likely going to be able to show up when people search for those specific details around their own business. Because essentially what AI is looking for is AI is looking for like a match of a company who's done something similar so that they can say, oh, here's an agency or a business that has done a very similar service for a client like you. That's why they're going to be great for you. And so I think what's really changed is companies used to talk very broadly about what they did and talk at a very high level, and even the approach that they would take to producing content led to that. So for example, if they hired freelancers and they wrote about topics at a very high level that didn't really understand the nuances of their business, then it's not really going to communicate things well in AI. And now what I'm saying is it's becoming even more important to write very specific content that goes through the company that you worked with, what the situation that they were in, what you specifically did to help them, and like results. And all that information is going to be learned by AI and it can be communicated back to people that are searching around topics of interest.
I think you had a really interesting phrase in the article that I liked to have said the AI becomes your salesman or something like this, like your salesperson, like that's the first touch point because it's a conversation and it's not just like a marketing entry point where the first sales touch point is your website. Now people are doing that on ChatGPT instead or equivalent. And so you need to feed it stuff so it can position you properly. Now, the other thing I'll say is like consequences for SaaS companies, for example, and product-based companies, it's also you need to be publishing detailed stuff about your features. You can't just keep that hidden in some product demo recording or whatever, or talk about it generally. And that's why our approach to content for our clients isn't changing that much yet, because we already have been doing this. Because we've been writing bottom of funnel content, which we've defined historically as bottom of funnel for Google. But but if you look in our content, and I think we might have videos for this, we definitely talk about it in articles on our site and in our course. In the actual pieces, if we rank someone for something like best accounting software or whatever, we have like pages of detailed on features, pain points, benefits, use cases, screenshots, so that when ChatGPT is indexing this, and as per our other study, it's definitely Googling things and ingesting that. When it indexes that or ingests it, it kind of has that rich context. So then if somebody is looking for accounting software for this really specific thing, like, hey, I run this blah, blah, blah company and we have this expense receipt issue and that's really important to me, if you have that feature and you haven't talked about it ever, it's not going to recommend you. But if you have multiple pieces of content where you've gone into your expense receipt indexing blah, blah, blah feature of your accounting software, you have a shot. So that's that. Now on your freelancer comment, another thing I wanted to ask you about is the first section in the post. You talked about freelancers writing surface level beginner content. Something we've talked about for years is how a lot of that is top of funnel beginner level content. How to do X, how accounting works. And you wrote in this post, top of funnel content is basically going to be dead with ChatGPT. Why?
Yeah, I mean, let me just pull up an example so we can go through this together. But essentially, now when you ask it a question, you can see how it doesn't really mention
So the question you asked or you're projecting is, what is content marketing?
Yeah, what is content marketing? So now if you ask high-level questions, this used to be a key thing in SEO, is people used to create these what is posts and definitions and things like that, like going after the larger category, and then to get people to click into their site as a way to drive traffic. There's no reason for ChatGPT to send traffic to your website or even mention your company when you're just asking a basic question. Why? Because the definitions or these answers are not too different. So there's no reason for them to say, this is this company's definition. No, it's just going to say the definition. And so...
Scroll all the way to the bottom. Does it cite sources in this answer? No.
No sources cited. And so yeah. I truly believe top of funnel content is pretty much dead in AI tools. Like, yes, Google still has a large market share, but as searches shift to AI, it makes no sense to really write content around these topics because there's just no way that it's going to mention your brand or you're going to get any benefit from this. And so I believe that our strategy of pain point SEO becomes even more pronounced in the age of AI, because what we've seen just from measuring different keywords across these platforms is that brands are only getting mentioned when the query has something to do with either like a how-to query, so like a jobs to be done question, or it's a really bottom of the funnel question. And so all of these top of funnel questions, definitions, things that people used to create content around, you're just really not going to get benefit from writing about these kind of things going forward. And so I think, how do things change going forward? I think creating a lot more bottom of funnel content that's really specific. So whereas you might have gone only after category keywords before, category keywords with a layer of specificity, and the more specific you can get in the content you write, I think that's just going to help your brand show up in all of these tools.
Yeah, we define category keywords as something that's product related about your product category. Like the example I was using, that best accounting software, versus what is content marketing we define as a top of funnel query is equivalent to like how a P&L works or something like that. If somebody types in how a P&L works in the Google world, the content marketing argument for writing an article for that, if you were an accounting software company, was, oh, they're asking about some accounting thing, we can talk about it, and that's going to be someone who maybe in one day in the future needs accounting software, and it's on the topic of accounting. But that's because Google wouldn't answer the question yourself. Now, Google itself is answering that question in the AI overview or AI mode, but definitely people who are searching on ChatGPT instead, they don't want to be linked to a website. They just want ChatGPT to answer it, and it obliges and does. So last thing we'll mention on all of this is we have a tool to help monitor rankings, in particular for keywords that you think ChatGPT and equivalent, Perplexity in our case, and Google Gemini are likely to mention brands in, and to see if your brand is one of the ones that they're mentioning you in. So that tool is called traqer.ai with a Q, TRAQER.ai. We'll link it in the show notes in both YouTube and the podcast platforms. And it came from scratching our own itch through this whole conversation. When we showed this to clients, like especially Caitlin's study saying, hey, there's like a 60 to 80% overlap with when we're ranking on top 10 on Google and being mentioned in ChatGPT, they said, ooh, for us, can you show us our data? Which keywords? And we didn't find good tools out there, especially with agency level pricing, if you had hundreds of keywords to track across multiple brands. So we built this, and you can enter in keywords of any kind, basically like a prompt, and it will ask what's your brand name and what's your website. You can see and enter best accounting software and see, does ChatGPT mention us? Does Perplexity mention us? Or, as Benji was saying in this episode, you can then say best accounting software for small business or something you care about. Best accounting software with, that integrates with NetSuite. That's probably not a thing, but whatever. Or like in our case, best content marketing agency for SaaS, the content marketing agency for lead gen, or for brand building or top of funnel or whatever. And for all of those, see, does ChatGPT mention us? Does Perplexity mention us? And over time, you can track where you're getting mentioned and not. So you can check that out at traqer.ai, and we would love to get feedback from folks that follow.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. You can also get the audio-only versions of these shows wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us at growandconvert.com/newsletter for any articles and updates for when these videos come out.